The automobile is such an important part of our life. I don't think we could live without it today. But Harold, how did you learn how to drive?
Well, I'm an identical twin.
Oh.
And my father had to make a decision who he wanted to teach how to drive first. So I wound up learning how to drive basically from my friends who were a couple months older than me, and I talked them and nagged them to let me drive their cars. So when my father finally got around to me to learn how to drive, he says, "How'd you know all this?" I said, "You're a good teacher."
Oh, and he's a good liar.
So I learned from several people.
Okay.
My dad primarily, he was one that thought he taught me how to drive.
Well, what about your first car, Harold? Who got that for you?
Well, actually, my brother and I bought our first car together.
Okay.
It was a 1960 Chevrolet, and we had to pool our money to get a down payment together.
Mm-hmm.
Only I was working at the time. So I was able to come up with a down payment and said, "You owe me."
You had the major share in the automobile.
I got to drive it the bulk of the time. And it was a fun car, but it was a manual shift.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was an automatic shift today. And it was one of the first cars that did not have running boards on the side. And it actually had 2 side view mirrors on it.
Oh.
The first cars never had any. Then they had 1 on the dashboard. Then they had 1 on the window. And then they expanded to 2 on the outside of the car. So
progress.
It was progress. It was change at its finest.
Right. Now, Dan, you're about the only one. What was your first car? I know we heard from Ed.
Well, first car, I probably drove the family car because my dad, during the week didn't use the car at all. So, and then when I got out of high school, went to college, I actually, the family car, once in a while, I drive to Philadelphia, went to Villanova and came back. And then the other main reason I needed a car is when I got a little older, we started dating, we'd go over to Manhattan and drive over to Manhattan on the weekends. And during that time, one of the things I remember the most about driving, and I think talking about having a first accident, I was coming back from a date in New York. I was driving. My date was in the front seat with me. A friend of mine was in the back with his date. And I forget exactly what it was, but I got in an accident. No one was really seriously hurt. But what happened was that night, the New York Daily News had a photographer out. He was going around and what happens on the weekend. And he came over and took a picture of the accident,
And there you were.
And they had a story, and I said, I don't want, whatever. And it turned out on the Monday, there was a big story about what going on the weekend, and there was a picture of me, and he was talking about
Dear Dad.
driver got the accident, and he said, don't want any, please, no pictures. Well, I'll tell you now, I called my dad that I thought he'd be really angry. He wasn't as angry as I thought because everybody was.
You were kind of fortunate.
Well,
how about you,
right.
Ed? Did you have any accidents?
Oh, I had a few.
Oh.
No, when I had my 36 Oldsmobile, I was with my friends. We were riding around late at night. It was about midnight. And this was in Chicago, at Chicago Avenue in Ashland. And we were going northbound, going home, and we had the green light, and we went right through the green light, and here comes a car from the east end, plowed right into the side of us.
Then you weren't at fault.
Not me.
Okay.
Thank God. Because I learned from my cousin, you speed, you're going to get it,
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, I wound up opening the doors almost in Andy's Candies,
Mm-hmm.
But nobody got hurt in my car, so we went to see the other car, and here's this poor lady. She's bleeding like, I don't know how you want to say it. So anyhow, then we went to court to settle the whole thing. Well, I wound up, I had to go to a higher court to sue him to pay for my damages. And then we found out the lady that was hurt in his car wasn't hurt in the car. She got in a brawl with her mother at a tavern over at Chicago and Orleans, and she cut her up with a beer bottle.
Oh my gosh, this sounds like
That'd make a good movie.
Yes.
You talk about, when you see this,
That was your first accident.
Yes, and I mean, when I went over to see what happened, and I said, I start shaking. I figured, well, my fault, but it wasn't my fault.
Well, thank goodness for that. It wasn't your fault, and yours, was it your fault?
It was my fault. But,
Okay, then we
yeah.
won't go into that.
No,
But how
okay.
about you, Julia? What was your first accident?
I am a very good driver. I'm patting myself on the back.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood too. I really never had an accident. I was driving down Addison Boulevard, making a left-hand turn, and somebody behind me went around me. So when I made the turn, I ran into that individual. Well, the guy left his car and ran away and ran home because he was late to work. And his wife came, identified the car and said the husband left for work. Well, the police went to work and got him.
Okay,
And that was, totally his fault. But nobody was really hurt.
Thank goodness
And then
for that.
another very small accident, which is 2 in my lifetime. That's about 2 years ago, right here on Schaumburg Road and Roselle. I'm in the left-hand turn lane. Cars are going on Roselle, and the lady turns on the green light. You're making the left-hand turn. The guy goes straight ahead, hits the lady, pushes her against me. That's when I got hit again. But I'm sitting there,
Yeah, thank goodness that nothing.
And that was the only 2 in all my lifetime.
Well, thank
very
goodness,
fortunate.
they were all accidents that did not have any, bad
Yeah.
consequences. And how about you?
My first accident was 3 months before I became engaged to my current wife, and a drunk driver came over a rise in the road on the wrong side of the road and hit us head on. Fortunately, no one was seriously hurt. I was able to see the headlights as he came over the hill, and I was able to cut to the right and get down to a slow speed. And that was very unnerving. Okay, but you think, here I am getting ready to get married, and we're in this terrible crash, but in all, it worked out okay.
Yeah, well, it really is fortunate. I myself have been in a couple of accidents, not that I caused them, although I have to admit, I took my driver's license test, and it was up in Libertyville, and I had practiced in a small car, and my sister insisted I take a station wagon, so as the driver tester said, well, back out. I backed out right into a Lincoln Continental.
Oh, my.
He says, pull in. So I pulled in. So my sister and I went home and we had a banana daiquiri. But the next day I went back and I passed the test in the small car. But thank goodness all of our accidents, are not anything. But we have to be very, very careful nowadays. Now, were there any interesting experiences that you had with your car? If we can just shortly mention them. Anything? I know Julia said she traveled how many miles?
Oh, a lot. We traveled through every state in the United States.
Oh, boy.
And we drove a lot into Canada. We did travel, and into Mexico. And my husband loved to drive. But I was the relief driver. He drove part of the way, and I drove. But I drove up Pikes Peak.
Oh, my.
But I refused to drive down.
I don't blame you.
That's not mine.
Well, we're coming to the end of this segment. In our next segment, Harold is going to be talking about how AARP is helping seniors drive safely and avoid accidents. And I think one of the things that we all remember from the past is those little Burma shave signs that we used to see on the road, and this one is very good. Henry VIII sure had trouble. Short-term wives, long-term stubble. Burma shave. We'll be right back after a short break.